So, in the previous episodes, we'd been talking about how you became part of a motorcycle gang. You were living in Baildon, and
Baildon Village.
you had become part of another counterculture, subculture if you like, and started to dress within that subculture, which would probably be thought of as punk rock.
Yeah, it was punk rock. I mean, people forget or they underestimate when they're older the importance of dress as a signifier for who you are when you're young. I mean, I see adults who've forgotten this all, and they go, I don't know why they're going on and on about having those particular trainers. My God, one set of trainers is this, but it's they would have died if they couldn't have gone out on the right T-shirt. So we forget, as we get older, what it means. So swapping over from being a biker, basically, to being a punk was fairly unknown. It wasn't really done. It was the music. I mean, it's always been the music that pulled me into it. I don't think I felt part of the Bradford punk scene, I never really felt part of anything. But I acknowledge that that we all love the same music.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the music.
Well, the music to me, I mean, the Satan Slaves kind of ran to kind of the Ram Jam band, Black Betty, and when they got terribly stoned at the end of a party or of an evening, it was Donovan, which I've never fully understood, but out would come the Donovan, Universal Soldier and Mellow Yellow and all of this sort of malarkey. So it was kind of that, what do they call it now, adult orientated rock or something ridiculous, heritage rock,
classic
rock, yeah, and all this nonsense. So it was all of that, But again, I always try to say this to people. I don't know if they actually get it a lot of the time. It was how music was made that fascinated me. What you were doing with music, what it was as an art form, not just as like what was Top of the Pops or all your mates liked or anything like that. It was how it was made, and I loved the idea of pulling it all down and starting again, and the fact that you didn't have to be this classically trained Rick Wakeman style keyboard wizard or whatever, or play 50 runs on the guitar at once behind your back with your teeth and all this malarkey. Although I think Jimi Hendrix was actually a punk in a lot of ways, but no, that kind of really technical stuff, it didn't interest me at all, because it was very formulaic and it all sounded the same after a while. And the bigger stadiums and the grander light shows and the bigger this, that and the other, that's never interested me, because I'm interested in the emotional response that music and art can elicit, not how grand and how fancy you can be and how many lights you can have and how many golden scans whirling around and how many bloody this, that and the other, and all those fake Marshall cabinets up the sides to show how loud you are and all of this. No, it didn't interest me. Punk interested me because it was pulling everything apart. It interested me because it was pulling the role of women apart as well. It was girls, could be participants. They could have a band. I mean, there weren't that many, but they could have it. They could do it, and they did do it. And I think anything that pulls apart the perceived role of women in rock music is a good thing. I'd still like to pull it all down. I'd love to pull the whole music industry down and just tear it to pieces and just start again and say, right, all you lasses who are musical, you girl drummers, you get to it now, And you lads, none of this bullshit about, girls are only there to do the cooking or to be like, have sex with after. Forget all that. But, that's never going to happen. But punk had that kind of feel that there was energy, it was driven, it was, we were going to change society. And of course all that appealed to me enormously, because that's always what I wanted to do. Change something, make something change. So I loved it, I loved all the music.
So around that time, I suppose your first introduction to punk rock music would have been when you were working on the door at Queen's
Yeah,
Hall
yeah.
and
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
going
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. The disco.
What was
Punk disco.
What was a floor filler
Floor.
back then?
I can't even say it. Floor filler. Oh, you know, there was Psycho Killer and things, the American things as well. But there was like, can't remember who did it now. It's called Underpass.
All right.
Yeah, but obviously everybody in Bradford referred to it as underpants. So that poor man, you know, there was warm leatherette, you know, and there was all kinds of things. I mean, I couldn't even name them. It was just hundreds of different songs, you know.
So it was, because some of the songs you mentioned there was almost like that, slightly electronica.
Slightly
movement,
electronica, yeah.
but with that punk minimalist attitude.
Yeah, there was. I mean, the Sex Pistols to me were a bit of a made-up boy band. I know what they did. I know the effect that they had and all the rest of it, but they were Malcolm McLaren's little lads, weren't they? You know, he made up a band. He liked to do that. He liked to. I know. I can see the pleasure in it. Absolutely, I'd have probably done the same if I was, you know, if I'd been him. But and you know, there are some that would say that I did. But you know, yeah, they were very London as well. So it didn't relate very terribly well to up here. There were a lot of local punk bands going as well at the time. You know, they were all everybody wanted to be in a band. Everybody wanted to be, you know, playing somewhere, doing something. So that was good. I thought that was great. You know, yeah, you didn't have to wait for somebody to tour in, you know, and tour out again. You could go and see loads of things. They didn't have many live bands at Queen's Hall, I don't think, at that time anyway.
As we've spoke about music in previous episodes, would it be fair to say that punk rock was a movement that fulfilled everything that you'd been leading up to and looking for, searching for, from the energy of the music and the movement, the politics behind punk rock, but then also, off the back of that, the fact that it was like a DIY movement and had a lot to do with looking different and not standing out, but a little bit like when you were in the biker gang, you had not only a code, but also there was a particular type of dress.
Oh, there was a uniform.
Yeah, uniform.
There was a uniform. Yes, this was, and it was very sort of well, practical. It had to be practical for obviously because you're on a motorcycle, so to some degree it had to be practical. But it wasn't very much a uniform. The thing about punk was that you could pull all the things that, as women, you know, all the things that you were supposed to wear, you could turn on their heads. You didn't have to be. I mean, these days it's nothing. You know, you just wouldn't even blink. In those days, we stopped traffic.
Yeah.
We just literally stopped. I had a bloke once ran into another bloke who was staring at me that badly. You know, and I thought that was hilarious.
I mean, people got arrested.
They got very angry. People got very angry with you. They were very angry. Men were very angry with punk girls. Very straight men. And violent. And people forget that. They forget how aggressive they were, especially if they were pissed, you know, after a night's drinking. Hey, what the fuck are you? You know, what the fuck are you got up as? You fucking whore. You know, you'd get all this. And people now, you know, with safe spaces and everybody's trying to be nice to each other, they forget what that violence was like. I once got beaten up in a nightclub because, you know, my tattoos were better than the bloke who was sitting next to me.
I mean, you wrote about your experiences as a female punk rocker in your first poetry collection, Mad Bad.
Yeah, there was War of Attrition was the one that, you know, that really... And do you know what that got up people's noses? Much more than I ever thought. I never thought it would. I thought people would go, "Oh yeah, I understand this. This is the waiting in the taxi queue with a lot of drunk people that are frightening." But it got up a lot of men's noses. I mean, and this is men who weren't, you know, straight. As we used to call them, technically bitter men. You know, these were kind of the liberal. Oh, let's all, you know, have a club. You know, kind of anarcho types. They got really annoyed. They got really annoyed because they never addressed the sexist stereotypes within their own culture, if you like.
Yeah.
So there I was, basically, you know, that, and so they tried to call me all sorts of things because of that. They tried to get me banned from venues, and they tried to go. I just couldn't have cared less. I was just like, well, you know. I have it now, you know. I wrote that poem, Narcotica, and everyone, you can't write that, it's about prostitutes, it's horrible. And it's like, you really cannot tell me what to write. And you couldn't then, and that was part of the pleasure of the punk movement, was thinking, well, do you know what, I can write whatever I want. And I wrote a lot of tosh at the beginning. A lot of it is tosh, you know, a lot of it is because I was, thank God they didn't video everything in those days. It would have been dreadful. But I could, you know, think about what are we not allowed to talk about? What are we not allowed to say? What, as women, what are we not allowed to be? You know.
So in that era of your life, punk very quickly gave way to a new movement which you became a figurehead in, and quite influential in not only your writing style, but also you were part of an influential band that you kind of helped to, I want to say form, but it was more that you had an ethic and you
I think it would be hard to quantify how aggressively I wasn't assertive, I won't say that, because it's not true. I wish it was, but it's not true. I was aggressive, driven and ambitious. The whole world wouldn't have been enough to satisfy what I wanted to do, how I wanted to change everything, eradicate injustice, eradicate racism, eradicate sexism, homophobia. I wanted that all gone. I wanted that to be relegated to the Stone Age. You know, and nobody ever said, I think you're being you're overreaching. Anything like that, because they didn't dare talk to me about it. Because a lot of people were very, very frightened of me. And I actually, I can see why. I wasn't the easiest person in the world. I was very angry, very driven. In order to drag that band out of Bradford, it was every atom of energy that you could possibly employ as a person. And I have a lot of energy. I did. I'm a bit more tired these days, but I did at the time. And I really wouldn't listen to people going, well, I don't think you can do that, or nobody's done that before, or who do you think you are? Which you got all the time, non-stop, you know, constantly. So I'll take my hoodie off now because I'm a bit warmer. But so you got that all the time. So I was not very receptive to that at all. But I mean, it didn't start any of it until I met Justin in that nightclub. Really, which was a complete chance of fate. And you know, I'd come out of everybody. A lot of people know this story, so you know, briefly, I'd come out of the nightclub where I was working as a bouncer. I'd gone with a girlfriend to a nightclub further, you know, that was still open. That was particularly sort of seedy and grim, but everybody went there. It was one of those places after I was drinking. And we were, you know, I think, and I had the parachute suit on that I loved. I don't know what happened to that. I wish I still had it. And I had short blue hair at the time, and I was probably wearing a pair of Diamante chandelier earrings because I quite proper fancied them. And we just went because everybody went, and then she got a bee in her bonnet about we should ask some lads to dance because, you know, otherwise we'll just be stood here. And frankly, I was quite happy to just be stood there, you know, because, yeah. So she said, look, I'm going to go and ask those, and we're modern women, that's what she said. I always remember that. She said, we're modern women, we should just ask them to dance. And I thought, okay, somebody's been reading Cosmopolitan again, you know. And she randomly picked two lads on the dance floor. One was very tall with a mass of curly hair, very thin, and the other one had his back to me, and he was shorter. And before I could say anything, she said, I'll have the tall one. And I thought, oh shit, because I'm tall, you know. And I thought, oh, this one's a midget, you know. So she went up and asked him. There were students, you know. She went up and asked them to dance, and the tall one looked a bit like, ooh. all right then, sort of thing. And the other one turned round, and as everybody, as I say, it's an old story now, but you know that I had been drawing. It is true. I had been drawing a face in my sketchbook since I was a child, a little face in the corners, in the margins, and things. And I used to call it my ugly face that I used to draw over and over again. And when the lad turned round, it was that face, and it backfooted me terribly because I would actually probably went shit like that, you know, because it was so uncanny and weird, and as I say it now, it just sounds a bit like as if, you know, but it was weird and it did upset me. So I said something. It's like, do you want to dance? And he wasn't that short, actually. He was about the same size as me, same height as me, so it wasn't that desperate. I wasn't going to be clutching him to my bosom all night long, you know. So I remember saying to him, so what's your name then? And I was really kind of short because I was a bit, you know, back-footed. And he said, Justin. And I said, why, are you a fucking hairdresser? So that was my introduction. And then I thought, oh God, that was really rude. And I said, so, you know, haha. Where are you from then, mate? And he said, Watford. No, he said Slough, that's right, near Watford. As if I wouldn't know where it was. And I said, Slough, come, friendly bombs and fall on Slough, it isn't fit for people now, which is a John Betjeman poem. And he kind of looked at me like, and so it went on, you know, and we talked all night long. And I think the thing is, people don't realise, for me, I can't speak for Justin. In any of this, I am not speaking for Justin, right? I don't know what he thought. I don't know what he thinks now. That is his business. I'm only speaking for myself and how I felt at the time. And that people need to really understand that. It's not his story, this is my story. I can't say what he thought, but I know what I thought. And it was so amazing to have someone to talk to. People forget, it's all very well going like, oh, it was exciting being a biker, and wasn't it fascinating being, you know, this, that and the other and all the rest of it. But I had no one to talk to. Nobody, and I don't mean this in any rude way, but nobody with the same interests or intellectual interests as me. And then I met someone, and we couldn't stop talking. We couldn't stop talking. We talked. We walked around the city, and it was freezing because it was in January, so it was like Baltic. And we went for a curry, you know, because curry houses were open all hours in those days, and had a cheap plate of keema, and possibly with peas, possibly without, and then just kept on walking and walking and walking around and talking. And to me, it was wonderful to meet somebody who could talk about the things that I wanted to talk about, finally. Because remember, I didn't go to university. It was probably nothing to him because he was at university, so he had all these interesting people to speak to, but I had never gone to university. So I didn't have that experience of having, you know, like-minded peers to chat to about stuff, you know. So this was amazing to me to find someone to talk to. I don't remember what we talked about, just stuff. We really started the conversation, and it didn't really stop for about, you know, good 40 years. But that was it. It was the conversation. It was the I never met anyone that I was so easygoing with immediately. There wasn't a problem. It was just talking all night long. You know, and that was it really. And then eventually, you know, there were a lot of stutters in our friendship, because there were all kinds of things like his family were horrified because he said, you know, I'm a year older than him. So the fucking idiot went and told his parents he was dating a woman who was older than him with blue hair. And they just imagined, you know, predatory nana. You know, what do they call it now? Gilf. And I don't know what possessed him. He does say stuff sometimes. And So his family were not very best pleased. His friends were not very best pleased because I was this, punk bikery kind of outcasting person that they didn't really think was, very nice, or anything like this. And so there was quite a lot. My friends thought, who is this Wally, basically. They just like, And my marriage was breaking apart at that point anyway, because we'd married very young. He was a very nice boy, as I've said before, and I'll say it again. He was a very good lad, but we didn't have a lot in common. And as he worked away more and more and more, then the bond that did bind us together just fractured because he just wasn't there. I know that he meant well. I know that he wanted to support his little family, and that he felt that working, to earn money was the best way to do this. But it would have been much better if he'd stayed home and earned less. Really. But he's a young man. He was taught he was doing his best, so it wasn't difficult. But then, there were all kinds of things like Justin and I, we weren't really couple material. But when you're young, you don't really know that. You don't have enough experience to go, well, actually, do you know what? We're just really good friends. Like, we're like siblings. We used to say we were like twins. We were that close. So you mistake that for being coupley. So we tried that, but it didn't work. So then you think, oh well, we must split up then, because obviously, because you don't know. And then we found we couldn't. And then at one point I remember his ex-girlfriend coming back and being very loud and possessive and obnoxious, and he wanted me to leave, and I had to leave in the middle of the night when it was snowing, and I managed to walk across town and find my friend who was still up because he was a poet, and moan to him about it. And so it wasn't, like a plain sailing thing at all. There were lots of hiccups and bumps and people trying to split us apart and going like, well, if you're not dating this guy, who the fuck is he then? Where's it going? What are you going to do? You need to get married and settle down, and you can't do that if you're like, So there was a lot of all of that going on as well. But it was, in the end, the conversation. And then it was the music. Although he had a really kind of soft spot for Bruce Springsteen, which I did enjoy, but I wasn't fully, okay, that's cool, I understand. But, So he wanted to start a band. So it was, he said the thing that no woman ever wants to hear, which is, I've got a band, would you like to come and hear it? And you don't want to hear that sentence, because if you're fond of someone, and you quite like them, and they've got this, and you go and they're absolutely awful, the last thing you want to do is crush their dreams by going, well, you were shite. That would be just dreadful. So
don't give up your day job.
Don't give up your day job, mate.
Lights are good.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh, your trousers looked amazing. I thought anything, but you were rubbish. So I thought, oh God. So anyway, I thought, well, show willing support. So I went. It was a textile hall in Bradford. I can't remember what he was calling himself at the time. I think he was calling himself the New Misfits, or then occasionally called himself the Fit Miss, for reasons known only to himself. And it was him and Stuart Morrow, the bass player, and who was shaking lentils in a plastic bottle. I remember that. And a girl singer who was very, very petite, but had the most enormous chest you've ever seen. So she very strongly resembled a weeble. But she had a belting club voice. It wasn't a rock voice or anything like that, but she could proper belt them out. She'd have been wonderful in the clubs. She was a really good singer. And they were doing covers of like Hit the Road Jack, and then they would occasionally do one of Justin's songs, which appeared to be all about buses. I remember it now. I remember it now. It was called the 614, and the chorus was like the 614, the 614.
So we finished the last episode where you were talking about how you went to see Justin's band after you'd formed this friendship, which had happened just by chance, really.
Oh, complete chance, yes. If I had not bothered going out for if she hadn't nagged me, that lass whose name I cannot remember now, but if she hadn't nagged me to go to that nightclub, the company basically, because she wanted to go, I would never have met him. Our paths as people would not have crossed, because he was the university person and I was not. So it was purely by chance. But the band, I watched the band in the textile hall with the lentils and the singer and everything. And I already knew enough about music to know that it was really bad. It wasn't bad because the people in it were bad musicians, which is something else altogether. When somebody's just not talented, you just can't do it, then they can't. As long as they're enjoying themselves and really give a shit, It was bad because he was trying to be something that he obviously wasn't musically. He was trying to please his friends at the university and write things that he thought they would like, and they were very kind of dungaree wearing, rainbow jumper, peace nicks. So he was writing material that he thought they would, the 614, that they would enjoy at the, maybe they might have the university dance or something, the departmental party or something, and then, they'd like that. Stuart Morrow was obviously a wild card by anybody's standards, and as I say, the girl singer was, she was nice. I don't think I spoke 2 words to her, but she couldn't half sing. But it was just not good. And he came up to me afterwards, and he was very, very, and this is the awkward moment, because he wanted me to say, "Oh my God, you were wonderful." And I could have said, "You were great. I loved it. Aren't you clever?" But that's what I'd say to an amateur. That's what I'd say to somebody who really wasn't very talented, but was having a great time. And from the very first, I knew that it wasn't going to do him any good. So arrogant. But I knew it wouldn't. So he came up and he said, what did you think? What did you think? And I said, "It was bloody awful, mate. What do you want after this? What do you want out of this?" And he was very back-footed. And he said, "I want to be a rock star." And I said, "I'll make you into one then."
You did?
And I did. That's what he wanted. I would have given him the stars out of the sky if that's what he wanted. If that would have made him happy, if that would have progressed his art, I would have given him anything. In the end, I gave him absolutely everything. I mean, trying to start a band these days is almost impossible if you're not wealthy. It was difficult then, and we were very, very poor. I mean, he lived in a slum. It was filthy, it was cold, it was damp, it was disgusting. It wasn't romantic or, like, the artist Garrett, It was just grim. It was a grim slum. And, everything was dirty and it was just horrible. And none of it mattered because we were just talking and talking. I remember coming back from him from the nightclub once. First time I went to his house. And it was snowing very heavily because, as I say, it was early on in the year. And it was snowing very heavily. And sometimes in Bradford, as you all know, it snows really heavy for, like, a long time. So he decided to take a shortcut through Undercliff Cemetery, which is a very, very famous Victorian cemetery. So I was literally up to my thighs in snow, following this lad that I didn't really know, and thinking, I wonder if he's actually a mass murderer or something. Through the snow, to get to this house, which was as cold inside as it was outside. You know, and trying to make the gas fire work, and like trying to make some tea and stuff like that to get warm. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't pleasant. It was. Then you found another house. You know, then I left my husband basically, and you know, he'd already found somebody else, and that was fine because she was the right sort of girl for him. I don't know whether that lasted or not. I never really saw him much after that. And we moved into a shared house, because in those days everybody, it wasn't just students that shared house, everybody shared a house. You'd find a big old terraced house and you'd parcel it up room by room, and then there'd be somebody called the senior tenant who negotiated with the landlord, who was basically just everybody hated the senior tenant. He was like Hitler, because it's like they had control of the rent book, so you had to pay them and they'd have to come round and get the rent off you, your contribution to the rent. There'd be only one bathroom. They were usually really, really semi-derelict slums, a lot of them, and this was the one that we moved into. And we were sharing it with kind of all kinds of people at one point. I remember there was a bloke called Phil Horsley, if you're out there, Phil Horsley, and he was doing up, I think he was doing up a narrowboat. So he's a completely different type of person to punks who were doing music or anything like that. He had a very nice American girlfriend. So they were a completely different type of people. At one point we had Miss Pat, who was a girl who was studying the science of odours and smells at the university, and she was a bless. She was wonderful. How she ended up at that house is beyond me. What she must have thought, I cannot imagine. She was so respectable, and she would cycle around the countryside on her bicycle with this perspex box which she would trap smells in and take them back to the university. I thought this was wonderful. And she was such a nice person, and she never said anything about the horrible state of the kitchen and the house in general. I remember the kitchen was so vile once that I thought, oh, sod this, I'm going to paint it. But it never occurred to me that I might have to clean it or anything like that first. So it was centuries of grease, so I just painted it white as far as I could reach. And it never got painted any higher than as far as I could reach. And I just painted over the muck because it was just easier than trying to get it clean. So that was all kinds of people there. I remember my father coming and being horrified. He came to visit, he came to see me as I was living in this filthy squat, basically. And he was horrified. I couldn't explain to him. It was necessary. You know, that I didn't like it either, particularly. I didn't like living on. We used to not have proper food to eat. We didn't have enough money for food. Justin would go out busking. He went busking all over West Yorkshire. Like, he'd get the bus and he'd go and turn up in Barnsley or somewhere. And he'd go to a subway and he'd busk, and he'd come back with, you know, weighted down with coppers. And then on Saturday night was always counting the coppers. And the 10 pences if you were lucky. You know, and he did that all the time. He was really brave. He'd go out and sing covers, you know, and bring enough money home for the week. And yes, we were ostensibly on the dole, but he didn't pay for anything. He barely got enough to eat. And I remember one of the most appalling things that we used to eat, because it was on offer at the local shop. They'd got a job lot of vermicelli spaghetti. You know, it's called angel hair spaghetti. Because nobody wanted it, because nobody had anything like that around by us, you know. But so it was very, very. So we used to get that because it was incredibly cheap, and we'd have to. I remember eating it with mint sauce, because that's what we had in the cupboard, and peas, because there was a tin of peas lying around with a bit of cheese on top, and that was. I can taste it now. I can actually taste and smell what it was like. Yeah, vermicelli and mint sauce. Yeah. And, you know, tea all the time. We didn't really have a lot of coffee or anything. Couldn't afford it. Cheapest of everything. I sold all my wedding jewellery to fund the band. My engagement ring's my wedding ring. You know, some pieces of jewellery that Ken had given me. I sold the heirlooms from my family, my great-great-grandmother's gold bracelet, the signet ring my father had given me to fund the band, to get money together for a vehicle, to hire a vehicle from Rent a Wreck. There was actually an actual firm called Rent a Wreck with a R in Bradford, and they were not doing false advertising. Trust me. So it was, all kinds of people came to live there. So at one point, like Seething Wells was living there. Little Brother, the poet, wonderful comic poet, was living upstairs. Here was a trial to Little Brother, because he was terribly smart and a mod, and he was. We were all filthy punk hippie things, terrible filth buckets, trailing draperies and stuff, and he was terribly smart, and he used to wear like a beautiful mohair. Tonic mohair suits that he'd got from second-hand shops that were proper mod suits, he had tailored to fit. So he was in a constant state of trying to keep clean, keep his stuff. He used to write on his eggs, I remember that, because he couldn't bear the idea. We'd all be up there pilfering. We were awful. We used to pilfer his food. Poor man. And so there was a lot of poetry going on. Swells was a wonderful poet, wonderful writer, very energetic, brilliant, hilarious guy, very funny guy. And the whole ranting poetry scene. I was just sitting in the front room, and Swells, he never could enter a room normally. Right, Swells never just opened the door and walked in. He burst in everywhere he was going. You'd be having a cup of tea, like casually like this, and he'd suddenly burst in the door like that. He could not walk into a room normally, so he burst into the door, and he went, "I've had an idea," and we're all like, "Fabulous!" He was sitting in this wreck of this room, which is covered in like, just I can't even describe how crap it was. And he said, "I've got this idea. We're going to pull poetry down. We're going to destroy it. We're going to build it up again. It's going to be something completely different." Well, of course, obviously that appealed to me enormously. And he said, and everything's going to be different. And there'll be no more of this ivory towers and people in universities talking to each other. We're going to take poetry back to the people. And we're all going, Wolfie Smith, yes, power to the people. And he said, "And you," he said, gesturing at me, and I was like huddling over a cup. He said, "Draw a poster." "Yes, boss." I drew a poster, and that was the first ranting poetry poster. And then we started putting on gigs. Oh well, I did, because I always had to do the organising of things. And we put on a gig. I thought, well, right, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do this, from the ground. So there was a very popular pub in town called the Volts Bar, and it had a little stage. They did have bands on, but it was very midget, it's very small. So I went to the landlord and said, I want to put a poetry night on, and he laughed in my face. I said, "No, I promise you." I said, "Look, if it doesn't work and no one comes," I said, "I'll pay for the rent of the place." I don't know what I was going to pay with. I didn't have any money. But he didn't know that. So he went, "Well, all right, then you can have Thursday or whatever, dull night, slow night." So I got a graphics student at the art school I drew this poster, and he was going to screen print it for me. So he screen printed it on the very, very best paper that the art school provided for their students. This beautiful, heavy laid paper. And he screen printed it all beautifully. It was a sort of guitar melting. It was all very, And he printed up loads of these, and we put them up everywhere. But they were incredibly high quality, so of course they got taken immediately. So it was a lesson in don't have really good posters, because everyone will want them for their bedsit and for their flat,
Like Fillmore posters.
Yeah, really, they were. It was just by chance, but that was what he had, what he could steal from the art school for these posters. And And we, you know, I promoted this, and I said to everybody, you know, this has got to be a gig. This is not a poetry reading. The Swells loved it, of course. He was all, you know, getting. And I was not performing. I was just taking the money on the door. I was just organising it. And I got Wild Willie Beckett, and he said, and he was always very chaotic and crazy. And he said he would come and do his poetry dressed as a nun on roller skates. And I said, fantastic. Bring it on, dude, you know. And his little brother with his comedy poetry, which was incredibly sharp and witty and funny, you know, and everybody loved it. He was brilliant. And so it was a fantastic lineup, to be honest with you. Not that anybody'd heard of us, but, you know, in terms of talent. But I didn't do anything. So, come the Thursday, I was bricking it. So I thought, well, I really don't know where I'm going to get the money to pay this man. Well, I really don't. And I had a bit of a cry about it. I remember having a bit of a cry because I thought, I'm really stuffed. I don't know who I could ask for the money, because once I'd left home, I had no financial contribution from my parents whatsoever. They didn't even get a fiver for Christmas, you know, nothing like that. I remember my mother saying that she had an old fur coat, sheepskin coat, that she didn't want anymore at one point, and I said, oh, you know, I could punk it up, you know, and have that, and she charged me 20 quid for it. You know, so there wasn't any chance, and Justin would never ask his family for any money, even though they were very wealthy. And this was proper bricking it, and in the end there was a queue right round the block to get in. It was the most successful night they'd ever had in that pub, ever. Because I'd done all the promotion. Unwittingly, not really knowing what I was doing, but I felt that this was the right thing to do. You just had to tell everyone, you know, this is the place to be, this is the thing to do. You know, and it worked, and there was a queue right around the block, and there were people in the other bar craning to, you know, slightly divided off, craning to listen and trying to, you know, get past the barman to look and all this sort of business. And which made a profit and could pay the artistes 2 and 6, you know, whatever, but I could pay them, you know. So we did it again, and I think it was the third time, because I'd given up on thinking of myself really as a poet, you know, per se. I knew I was a poet, I knew I wrote and all the rest of it, but I didn't really think of myself as doing gigs anymore or anything like that. I'd done all that, you know, when I was young, and didn't see myself in that role anymore. And then somebody just didn't turn up, and Swell said, you've got to do a gig, you've got to do it. And I went, I can't do it, I haven't done it for years. He said, but you have done it. And I went, well, yeah, I have done it, yes. He said, well, there's a massive gap in the programme, you've just got to do it. I'll watch the door while you go up and do it. So, you know, I thought, okay, it can't be that, I'll just do it and get off, you know, as fast as possible. And of course then the sort of the lure of the stage took over, and I remember like telling this terrible anecdote that I remembered about a stripper and a python. It was you know, it was basically an incontinent python. But and I read a couple of poems, and it went down really, really well, and that was it, of course. And of course, you know, they said, well, here's the 4 of us, you know, we'll just be what we are. We don't need anybody else, really. So we ran it a few times, I think. Can't remember how many. It was always successful. Willie Beckett did actually appear as a nun in roller skates. He had a massive beard as well, so it was quite, you know. I ended up making props for him. I remember he had this massive, he wanted this Bible that he could take out a bullwhip from. So I had to make this this fake Bible that he could. I used to make things all the time. It's props and costumes and everything. I was always making something. You know, I made all my own clothes and, you know, everything really. And Justin's band, you know, the thing about it was, I thought, you could see what he could do. You know,